Myles Connor was an up-and-coming rock and roller in Boston. The son of a policeman, he also had a penchant for stealing art. For years, he was in and out of trouble for his heists and seemingly managed to get himself out of serving serious time. But after being caught red-handed with stolen paintings, he knew this was a jam that would almost be impossible to get out of. Connor's father set up a meeting between Myles and his longtime friend who served as a state police major. The officer told Myles, in what has since been described as an offhand comment, that the only way he could wriggle out of his latest tangle with the law would be with a Rembrandt painting. From there, the wheels began turning and Connor planned and executed his most important ruse yet, stealing a Rembrandt from Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, a bargaining chip to reduce his impending sentence. Anthony Amore, author of The Rembrandt Heist, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss his book that dives into the story of the stealing and ultimately returning of a masterpiece. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is Anthony Amore, author of The Rembrandt Heist. Anthony, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Brittany.
You write about the story of Myles Connor, who has been described as one of the most famous art thieves that this world has ever seen. And I want to talk about the unlikely friendship between you and him, because you serve as the director of security of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And as we know, the Gardner Museum saw one of the most infamous heists this country has ever seen, and you've investigated that heist for years. You talked about at the beginning of the book how you were a little hesitant to meet Myles Connor, but you became friends. You've been friends for years, and it seems like this really unlikely friendship, right? Because it doesn't sound like your jobs really are in line with each other. He's an art thief, you're an art crime investigator. Can you talk to us about meeting him and that unlikely friendship?
Well, sure. I go back early in my career, back to around 1991. I remember one of the first great true crime books I ever read was a book called Hunter by John Douglas. And I was really struck by how, at the time, Special Agent Douglas had decided in order to capture serial killers, you need to speak to serial killers. So when I was with Homeland Security for 14 years, and when I left and jumped into this world of art crime, I didn't know much about it. I knew how to do investigations and security, but art thieves were just the stuff of movies and action novels. So I decided I would do what John Douglas did and start interviewing people who stole art before to try to get inside their mind. But I put off meeting Myles. First of all, he was in prison. Um, so I waited about 10 years because there was some concern on my part that me meeting him when he got out of prison would be big news. And I knew he didn't pull off the Gardner heist, so I was hesitant. But when we met 10 years later, it was kismet. Just a strange thing when the two of us encountered each other. It was an instant friendship that's lasted to this day.
And I want to talk about, because you asked him yourself, you asked to get into the mindset of who steals masterpieces. What type, from A, your conversations with Myles, and from B, your investigations, get us into the head of an art criminal? Because like you said, this is really the stuff of movies. I mean, who steals masterpieces?
That's the big question, right? So the people who steal masterpiece paintings are not the people that you see in Hollywood films. It's very important to make that um, clear. People initially envisioned Thomas Crown sort Ocean's 12 team that stole art in that movie. But in reality, it's your common criminals who are stealing all sorts of things. And basically, when you get into their mind, you find that they've stolen things and made some money, but they realize that perhaps if they steal a masterpiece that's worth millions and they're able to fence it, then they're going to make real money. And that is the motive for every one of these art thieves, is to steal something to make money, except for Myles Connor.
And I want to get into the Myles Connor part of it in a little bit because, I mean, his motivation was fascinating for why he ended up ultimately stealing that Rembrandt. But I want to go on the flip side and talk about who exactly is buying these pieces because when someone steals a masterpiece, when they steal something that has fame, storied history, obviously it gets media attention because it's now gone. Who's buying that? Because, I mean, this story had a little bit of everything, right? Art heists, friendship, loyalty, also the mafia. I mean, who's buying that and why would they want that in their home or something like that and then be associated with another crime?
It's a really important question. It's right at the crux of the whole thing. So, in short, nobody's buying them, right? So, thieves steal these paintings thinking they can sell them, and it's a short-sighted crime. So, and I'm talking about masterpieces now. When you steal something that valuable, it makes big news, as you rightly pointed out. So, when you combine the fact that everyone knows what the work looks like and everyone knows it's valuable, it becomes too hot and too expensive for anybody to take the risk. Anybody who had enough money to buy it, even at 10%, could probably just buy their own. So, but what happens, and what happened in the case in the book, is that a reward was offered. So now the mafia gets involved and others get involved because there is a way to sell it, and that is to sell it back for the reward.
And you noted earlier in the conversation that Hollywood really paints art criminals, art heists as sexy masterminds almost, and the crimes aren't like that. I want to read part of your book. While Hollywood has convinced most of the world, including many law enforcement officials, that art theft is something perpetrated by slick cat burglars, that's rarely the case. Reality is far more mundane, far less attractive. It's typically perpetrated not only by the urbane and sophisticated, but by the brutish and uninformed. It seems like Myles, though, was a little different because you said that if he's focused and he was a musician, if he focused all of his time on music opposed to art thievery, he could be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You called him the Elvis Presley of art heists. What do you think separated him from the rest?
I'm so glad you asked that. So what separates him is motive, and also that he did it more than once. So because you can't sell these things, it's incredibly rare for somebody to steal a masterpiece more than once because they know it's a folly. But not Myles. I'm really interested in outliers. So I've kept this database I talk about often with about 1,500 heists in it. And again, you only see very few people who've done it more than once. But my last book was about a woman who's the only woman to steal a masterpiece. And then this book is about someone who did it more than once and did it better than anyone, and with these really unusual motives. So his life story, as you mentioned too, he could have been a major rock and roll star, but he just couldn't help himself when it came to fine art and antiques.
At times, I found myself wanting to pull my hair out with Myles. I found myself getting a little frustrated with him because it seemed like he had nine lives, right? He would find himself in trouble with the law, but then he was able to slip out, facing limited consequences, if that. But he would then go back to a life of crime. And this book really, at some points, it seemed stranger than fiction. One of my favorite parts was that at some points, Myles would dress up, pretend to be a doctor, pretend to be an expert in all things Asian artifacts, would go into a museum, this was one of his ruses, and then talk to people there, talk to the workers there, act like he was an expert, and eventually steal from that museum. I'm curious, in all of these decades worth of stories when it comes to Myles and when it comes to his relationship with his best friend, what are some of your takeaways? What surprised you the most between that relation and as well about Myles himself?
Boy, I think what surprised me most, and I knew he was a member of Mensa before I met him, so I knew that he was a brilliant person. I think what surprised me about him as an individual is his magnetism. He's very charismatic. I've seen him time and again. I'm having lunch with him or something, and someone will come by and I'll introduce him, and people are just drawn into him. Um, the other thing that interests me is that he is exactly what he purports to be. So he is a lover of Japanese swords. That is his life's passion. to this day. And he could have done so much with his life, but even when he would steal these items, it was about cashing them in somehow, rewards, that sort of thing, and and turning it into Japanese swords and other Japanese antiquities because this is what he loves. Not long ago, I said to him, you still have a lot of pieces that are legal. Why don't you sell them? You could live really well. And he just turned to me and said, Anthony, there's a thing called collecting. And that's it. And it's like this is his passion. He's anything you've ever heard about him in terms of his acumen when it comes to art, his skill as a thief, or his cunning mind, um, is accurate. And lastly, I would say, Brittany, his friendship with this gentleman named Al Donnelly, who is a straight arrow, who built a really credible career with some of the country's biggest stars at the time, and is one of the most likable human beings you'll ever encounter. And these two are such a yin and yang. Even physically, Al is 6'4" and Myles is about 5'6", and everything about them seems opposite, but they have this brotherly love for each other that spanned coming up on 70 years.
And you really detail that in the book. And like I said, I mean, this plays out like the plot of a movie. You have the one best friend from childhood who's on the straight and narrow, has this amazing music career. You have Myles Connor, you have a career criminal there, but he's bound by this code of ethics that he has, this personal code of ethics of loyalty, of friendship. You note in the book that if you, as a friend now of Myles Connor, left $10,000 on the table and got up, he would never steal from you because that's just not what his ethos is. Do you think that that personal code contributed to how he became or how he was such now this infamous, almost greatest art criminal in the world?
Without a doubt. That was really insightful the way you put that because Miles, with this code and his intellect, you have to think he's in his early 20s and he goes to prison, Walpole State Prison in Massachusetts, which at the time was one of the most dangerous prisons in the country. And um, despite his young age, when there were riots that made national news, despite his young age, he was the person that the convicts elected to represent them. You have all these hardened criminals, nobody's fool, and they turn to this young person, and he does such a great job representing them. He gets them ultimately, he gets them conjugal visits, and he gets them Harvard professors who would come in and lecture to them because he saw them as human beings and not as animals. Um, they remain loyal to him, and this is what made him fearsome in the underworld. One of the things another thing that surprised me, I had never thought about until I wrote this book, is that he was pulling off all these crimes in Boston where there were two incredibly dangerous competing criminal organizations, the Irish Mafia and the Italian Mafia. Both sought tribute from anybody who was committing crimes in the city. None of them dared approach Myles to try to threaten him because number one, they knew his power as an individual, but they also knew that his gang didn't operate out of because they were being paid. It was strict loyalty, and that made him very dangerous to those people.
Just this intense loyalty that I do want to touch on in just a little bit. But something else that was straight out of a movie was the fact that Myles's dad was a police officer. He's a law enforcement officer. He knows that his son's a career criminal, and he knows, can't really do much about it. But Myles finds himself in a jam that he just really can't get out of. He's caught red-handed with these stolen paintings. He was trying to sell them to an undercover agent, and he knows that he's in trouble here and he's in some serious trouble that he can't get out of like he has in the past. And so his father sets up a meeting with his old friend and Massachusetts State Police Major, John Reagan. And Reagan essentially says to him, hey, nothing short of a Rembrandt is getting you out of this one. And there an idea was born. So talk to us about the motivation here, using this Rembrandt, using this masterpiece as a get out of jail free card.
It's incredible. Something out of a novel, right? I mean, he he had gone along with some men on a theft up in Maine, and it wasn't his plan. He was a tag along, which is unusual for him, and not unusual is that he was arrested in this crime because it wasn't his scheme. While the others stole the antiques, he stole paintings by the Wyatts. Now, Myles knows you can't monetize these things. They're too valuable. They're too recognizable. But he's a risk taker and he tries anyway. And in the book, you see this incredible set of what his schedule was for that day was just unbelievable. He tries to sell them to somebody. It turns out to be an FBI agent. The FBI agent says, "We got you now, Connor. Let's see you get out of this one." And Miles just turns to him and said, "Just you watch me. Cool as a cucumber, not, completely not afraid." And he goes, as you rightly said, to see Major Regan, who is a friend of his dad's. And Regan is exasperated and on an offhand remark says, "It's going to take a Rembrandt to get you out of this one." And like you said, an idea was born. And Miles went and stole a Rembrandt. And it worked.
It did work because he stole it, used it as that bargaining chip, and got his best friend, who, like we said earlier, is on the straight and narrow. Can you talk to us from Al's perspective? Because you're friends with Al too now, and you've talked to him. I mean, what was that like? Because in the conversations with him, it seemed in the book, he's still, all these decades later, still smiling, thinking about what went down.
It's just something else, to be friends with Al as well, because his life story is incredible too. And, he was working with Frank Sinatra and Dionne Warwick and all these major acts. He had all of this access to the music world, and here's his best friend. And you have to remember when Miles was performing rock and roll, it was when rock and roll was born, right? He wasn't just hopping on a new fad. This was before the Beatles came to America. Um, and all along, Al understood Miles's talent and the promising career he had. And he was constantly trying to get him to walk the straight and narrow. I remember asking Al a couple of years ago, did Miles ever try to record an album? And Al said, I can't remember how many times I had the studio set up for him with the top engineers and producers and um, backing band and everything. And it would always be foiled because he'd be arrested for something. And you could understand how frustrating that must have been for Al because you want to shake your friend and say, you don't have to do this. But Miles, and it's important to remember a lot of the times he would commit crimes with these motives that were irresistible to him because maybe a family member was insulted or he was insulted or some other sort of thing that spoke to his credo of loyalty that just disrupted his music career but made him what I think is the best art thief who's ever lived.
And I think something that's beautiful if you have childhood friends, I do. I've had friends for over 20 years now, and there's something about childhood friends that they know you from when you were little, before you were anything, and you can call them. No questions asked. They would help you bury a body. They would do whatever you want. No questions asked because they know you. I mean, was there ever once? Because, I mean, Al was asked a lot of by Miles, but he did it without, like I said, any questions asked, without complaint. Does he have any sort of grudge? Is he upset that he had to go along with this? I mean, what does he feel now, do you think?
He just laughs. Al has the nicest, gentlest personality, and he's just a joy to be around. And when you ask him any story, he has his trademark sort of giggle laugh that he does, and his eyebrows arch very high. And he tells these stories. He's a lovable guy, and they both are. They really are. And um, at no time do you ever hear Al think like, I wasn't going to do this to help him. That doesn't mean he was overjoyed to do it, right? I mean, in the instance where he helps return that Rembrandt, he was sort of forced to because the people that were knocking on his door, he needed to get rid of it. But there's never a question about, am I going to help my friend? And I think it's that sort of, sometimes you have friends that are closer than family. I have a best friend who's closer to me than my brothers, and you get it. You know, you understand how there's that sort of relationship, um, and that's what they have, and it's something to behold, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book.
I mean, I thought to me that was one of the most beautiful parts. He had the mafia in his driveway, and like I said, it didn't seem like there was any complaint, no questions asked, no question of whether he was going to help just return this masterpiece. He did it, and it went out. It went off without a hitch. And I think to me, one of the most beautiful and telling parts of their friendship is that Miles, he wrote him a letter, and he already said thank you before the Rembrandt return even happened, because he knew he could rely on his friend so much to get this done and to help secure his freedom. And I mean, I think that there's really no better time for your book to be coming out. We're seeing the Louvre heist right now. I mean, your PR team is just working double time over here of having that happen. Just kidding, obviously. But when you see the Louvre heist, I mean, and you're just writing about this heist, do you see any differences? I mean, when you saw that heist, what were your thoughts?
It's interesting because people ask me that often. You know, were you surprised by this heist? And I'm not happy to say this, but I'm never surprised when there's a big heist. You know, the Louvre was hit, yes. Did they have horrible security? No, it's exaggerated about how bad their security was. I mean, could it have been better? Yes, every place could be better. No major museum has not been robbed. But I will say that I was taken by how clever their scheme was, using this broad daylight, high vis vests as if they're construction workers, right in front of passersby at the most visited museum in the world. That being said, fortunately, their execution once inside the building didn't go as precisely as planned, and they left things behind that thankfully have led to the arrest of two of the individuals who perpetrated this, and I'm sure, I really do believe they'll soon catch the other two if they're not following them already. Um, I'm sure that they're going through all the digital footprints of the two people they've arrested, who they've spoken to, who they hang with. They're all known to the police already. But in a case like this, just like the cases, Miles's cases in the Rembrandt heist, it doesn't matter if you've arrested the person. All that matters is if you get the stuff back. That's the issue they're facing in France right now.
And that's the point I just wanted to ask you about next. When you're covering someone like Miles, who is this criminal mastermind who thought 5 steps ahead and thought to secure this Rembrandt to ultimately use it as a bargaining chip, there's, as we sit here right now, and this can obviously change, there are 2 suspects in custody over the Louvre robbery. They reportedly have a history of stealing jewels. Do you think, A, this was a crime for money, or B, they're using this more as a bargaining chip? I mean, what do you think the chances of us seeing these jewels, the necklaces, the crown back intact?
I think there's a good chance because of the quick action by the police, who really should be complimented. Um, I think the people who are holding the pieces right now are wondering when someone's going to knock on the door. They have to be thinking to themselves, if we break these things up right now, we're going to be facing a much worse outcome in this. They probably understand that they could be caught very soon. They're probably coming up with plans, if they haven't implemented them already, about fleeing. I mean, fleeing to the first two, fleeing to Algeria and Mali. Those would be two difficult places to find people. I think it speaks to the identity of this gang. You don't go to Mali or Algeria unless you think you have a network that can protect you there. So I do think they'll catch them rather soon, the second two, but I do think along with that they'll get the jewels back.
And you've worked for DHS, you've worked for the Gardner Museum investigating that infamous heist, and then you looked at Myles Connor's story more closely in writing this book. I'm curious, have you learned anything? I mean, when after you're done with this research, what are some of your takeaways, and how are you looking maybe at art crime and crime in general with a fresh perspective?
One of the takeaways was exemplified by the Louvre heist. Thieves will always be trying to find a different way. You can't just look at how the last theft happened, make sure you're not susceptible to that and think you're fine. thieves are always, it's like terrorism in a way, and that's what my past career was. They're looking for different ways. They're looking for that path of least resistance, right? And Miles did that too. He, rather than break into a few museums, he would just go in and say he was a PhD expert, and he could talk the talk, and he dressed the correct way. And there was no internet back then to vet him quickly. So he chose the path of least resistance. And that's what made his thefts successful. That's what the thieves did at the Louvre. They said, if we go in, people aren't going to say anything if we use this method about going in through a window. And it worked in terms of getting through the jewels. So what I learned is that you can never be complacent. You have to constantly be thinking about how else could they hit us, because no place is 100% secure, none. So you have to think, how close to 100% can I get? And finally, when you think about Miles's ruses, you have to think to yourself, trust no one.
That's a really good point, because if I'm anywhere and I see someone either in a construction vest or carrying a clipboard, I mean, I'm not asking questions. It seems like they are supposed to be there. And I mean, one of the funniest parts of your book is when Miles was arrested, someone from a museum was like, that's not this criminal. That's Dr. Michael Joseph. He's the expert here in Asian artifacts. I mean, that was so funny because he really played that part, A, because like you said, he had that knowledge in his head, but B, it was just such an elaborate ruse, and no one questioned whether or not it was true. I mean, this book, like I said, is stranger than fiction. Where can people get it?
You can get it at any of the online retailers, of course, and it'll be in all the bookstores everywhere. So anywhere that you buy books, you can find this book.
Anthony Amore, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you, Brittany.